I could straight away try to connect us with our next speaker, who is Andrei Joel from European Environment Agency. He's head of group on climate change, impacts, vulnerability, and adaptation. So this is the moment we really switch on to adaptation segment of our conference today. So Andrei, can you hear me, please? Can we try again the link up with one of our speakers? Hopefully this works well. Andrei, I can see you. Can you see us a little bit, and can you hear us, please?
Yes, good morning.
Okay, good. Yeah. You have 10 minutes, please, for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting EEA to this interesting conference. I was actually listening to the previous presenters. It was very interesting to do so. So I briefly start with why are we interested in the topic, particularly from an adaptation perspective. The Paris Agreement has certainly recognized adaptation to be as important as climate mitigation, but we should not forget particularly the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction, which is increasingly also relevant for Europe, and not also to forget the Sustainable Development Goals. On the right-hand side, you see some of the key policies we have in Europe. I'm not going to read them out. I'm going to talk a little bit about the EU adaptation strategy. So here it is. On the right-hand side, you see what are the main actions for the strategy, the main priorities. You can read it yourself. I'm not going to read it fully out. Currently, the European Commission is performing an evaluation of the strategy, focusing on all the actions, particularly the Action 1, which looks at the number of member states which have a strategy. I'll come back to that. Looking at mainstreaming, very important to try to mainstream climate change adaptation in other policies. This also links to the fact that the EU is spending 20% of its EU funds for climate action. Now, of course, most of it actually goes to mitigation, but certainly part of it is used for adaptation. There have been a number of there's one stakeholder workshop, I should say, sorry, and there will be another stakeholder workshop early next year. There will also be a public consultation, and the Commission is intending to have a communication on the outcome of the evaluation by mid-next or end of next year. So that could be quite relevant, I think, for the audience. Now, just one particular element, briefly explaining it here, is the so-called Adaptation Preparedness Scoreboard. This is something the Commission is preparing for each country, and they intend to do so during the next months and make that available as part of the public consultation documents. The information actually based on what countries themselves report to the Commission and what we have also available at EEA. I'll come back also to that. Now, just a few things about what we're doing in EA. We publish and produce assessment reports. Here are some of the key ones which we have done over the last years, and we also maintain and update the Climate Adapt platform. So I'm going to show you a few things from the various reports. I don't need to go through this too much. It was extensively presented by the previous speakers. What are the impacts in the region you're in? What I think is important here to recognize that all countries still need to adapt to their own specific circumstances. What was also mentioned is there may be some opportunities in the region of the Baltic countries. On the other hand, it's still a question, will these opportunities materialize? I mean, agricultural practices are still very important, and even though there may be some increases in crop yields, for example, can the practices really actually deal with this? Can they make use of that? Just to say also that it is important that each country does its own national climate risk assessment. I think some of the next speakers will talk about that. Unfortunately, there is actually across Europe not really a common approach to risk assessments. In EA, we're just looking at a compilation of what all countries are doing in this area, and hopefully countries can learn from each other. We're not saying we need to have one methodology, but it could be important to think about maybe some more common types of indicators in the future. One example of more the impact side, of course, flooding is not only due to climate change. Climate change is an additional factor. But just to highlight the large and extensive damages which we see, this is an example of a flooding event in 2013, which also extended into the Baltic region. A few other slides about climate impacts. This is a slide showing on the left-hand side the losses in terms of economic losses. This comes by the way from Munich Re, one of the largest reinsurance industries. More than 430 billion euro on damages over a period of from 1980 to 2015. Roughly 1/3 due to river floods, landslides, and another third or a little more due to storms. And then also droughts and forest fires have large damages. What is interesting is actually only 35% on average is insured, so there could be quite some potential for better insurance and better access to insurance across Europe. If you look at the fatalities, it's really a different picture. Most of the fatalities are actually due to heat waves, and that's shown on the right-hand side. Just a few other examples. This looks a bit complicated without going into details. What you see on the left-hand side is that several species like birds and butterflies are moving northwards, but they're not moving as fast as the climate zones are moving or changing. So that will be really having an effect on ecosystems and biodiversity. And on the right-hand side, you see some species, that's the blue line, are certainly declining due to climate change at the moment. Some other examples here in terms of human health. This top graph shows Vibrio infections, quite dangerous disease happening in the Baltic Sea region because of increases. Well, one of the reasons was the increase in sea surface temperature. On the low end, you see an increase in West Nile fever, again, not only due to climate change and some projections into the future. It's not yet reaching, in a way, the Baltic area, but you can clearly see this moving up north. Other things which were mentioned, I think, happening and are potentially happening are impacts from outside Europe. So climate change happening outside Europe. What could be the effect on Europe? Without going into details here, I could refer you to the report, but there are potential effects on trade, on infrastructure, on human mobility, finance, and geopolitical risks. We also have published a report on the links between climate adaptation and disaster risk reduction, which we feel is increasingly getting attention. The report shows the knowledge base and also a number of good practices and what are some of the benefits. There's not much time to go through that, so the last part of my presentation, I'll focus more on the types of actions happening across Europe from a transnational perspective, national and local. In Climate Adapt, the platform we're maintaining, we try to support countries through the information we have there in their adaptation actions. And there are a number of elements which I'm going to show some examples of. So in the Baltic Sea, there is the EU strategy for the Baltic Sea region, and this was one of the first micro-regional strategies in Europe which actually included climate change adaptation. There was even a Bold Adapt, or there is a Bold Adapt project which was run as an Interreg project strategy for adaptation to climate change in the Baltic Sea region. It's more a proposal, but my understanding is this is being implemented now. And the Baltic Earth assessment of climate change was already extensively presented earlier. Some other then examples of what's happening now. The Council of the Baltic Sea State Secretariat is actually promoting action on climate change, building on this Bold Adapt strategy. The EU-funded Interreg program has also some projects on adaptation, and here's one example mentioned, where I understand Riga is actually involved on integrated stormwater management. On a national scale, in Climate Adapt, we collect the information which is reported officially. So we show what our country is doing in terms of policies, what sectors actions are taken, what assessments have been done, what type of stakeholder involvement has been taking place. Very, very briefly, it's a very aggregated slide. What countries now have been doing and are doing in all EEA 33 member countries. There now are 25 EU member states and 3 EEA member countries which have a national adaptation strategy in place. Here you see some countries already started quite early, countries like Finland, France, for example, Germany. If you look at the 3 Baltic states, Estonia has a strategy since 2017. Lithuania had a strategy already in 2012, but Latvia, as far as I understand, is now about to finalize the strategy. I think we'll hear more about that later. However, only few countries are actually in the stage of really implementing these strategies, and even fewer countries are monitoring the actions. So there is still quite some opportunity for further actions across Europe. And finally, something about cities. I think this is the area where a lot of action is taking place, but still, it's still quite difficult for cities to act because of lack of capacity. There is knowledge out there, but they cannot access it. What you see is also that many cities start with the low-cost type of approaches, more awareness-raising activities, for example. Another issue is the problem with funding. It's very difficult to find funding. So what is key is to integrate adaptation actually, for example, when new or replacing infrastructure is taking place or new infrastructure is being built. And this will also be a cost-effective approach. We highlight ecosystem-based approaches. Well, actually, we don't do that ourselves only. It's clear that it's already increasing in many cities. And what I should say here also is there is the Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, which includes adaptation, and an increasing number of cities are committing to adaptation under this umbrella. This is an example of Copenhagen. Copenhagen was experiencing quite a number of very extreme precipitation events over the last years and decided to implement many different actions, combining what they call green, blue, and gray solutions, so infrastructure solutions, but also green infrastructure solutions for quite substantive amount of money. And this is one example. And lastly, to mention that in Climate Adapt, we have also other examples. Here is an example of the Netherlands, which shows how the River Rhine is, how the city of Nijmegen is adapting to climate change, which affects the River Rhine, where they've been constructing a channel to allow giving room to the river, let's say, and this is also good for recreation, for also for nature, enhancing nature in that area. So I'd like to finish with saying that a lot of the information is available on Climate Adapt. We have a newsletter, and if you're interested, you can sign up to that. So I'm happy to answer any questions now. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Andre. Yes, a couple of questions before we'll let you go. Well, it seems to me that there are much more. I was wondering about your impression about the overall division of labor between on the European level, on the national level. It seems to me that the adaptation side of the story is more on the national sort of shoulders rather than the European common shoulders, so to speak. Because, I mean, if we yesterday spoke at length about climate change mitigation, and then there's the big room for common policies and regulations and stuff like that. It doesn't seem to me that that much can be done on the European level, but I may be mistaken.
Well, first of all, indeed, there is no currently legislation in place. There is a communication from the Commission, which is called a strategy. However, there are certainly elements which are giving added value to EU action. So the first thing is funding, and there's quite some money available in all kinds of different EU funds. I forgot actually to mention the LIFE program. A second angle is the EU can certainly help to increase the knowledge. Horizon 2020 research programs have been very instrumental to improve the knowledge in Europe on adaptation. But thirdly, there is this point that partly, at least due to the strategy, countries have been increasingly starting national strategies and implementing them. So there is certainly a role for the EU there.
Okay, and very quick questions from the audience. What is the EU doing to stimulate climate change adaptation outside of the European Union? For instance, in the Sahelian countries, in Northern Africa, for example. So the question relating to geopolitical and security challenges relating to climate change refugees, the so-called, because that problem does exist. So do you have mechanisms or policies that try to offer adaptation advice or instruments or funding to countries outside of the European Union where it's most relevant to Europe?
Yes, well, I have to say this is for the European Commission, actually, to answer, not the EA, but I'm aware of what the Commission is doing. So, for example, there are so-called European neighborhood instruments for both the European neighborhood East and South, and there is a program for the European Neighbourhood South project, which covers all the countries, North African countries, trying to support them in adaptation. There is also funding. The EU is also providing quite a substantial amount of funding to countries outside Europe, in particularly the least developed countries, some of which are in Africa. And one other thing maybe to mention is that the Covenant of Mayors is actually now global. So there's also quite some activity on adaptation at city level, being promoted by the European Commission outside Europe, let's say.
Okay, and the final question is a tricky one. I tried to ask this to one of your colleagues yesterday, and he said it's a most tricky question for European level officials to tackle questions that inquire a comparison of member state performance on that or another question. But nevertheless, I have a panel here of Estonian, Latvian, Lithuanian representatives. We're going to talk about adaptation measures. I'm not asking you to give grades of Latvian, even though we saw a chart in which the Latvian boxes are not entirely ticked. But nevertheless, can you give us a sense of, in this Baltic region, in the Baltic states, but in the Baltic Sea region more generally, well, who is the pioneer, giving us the best examples and coming up with most innovative approach to adaptation?
Yeah, that's a good question. What I think is fair to say is that countries like Denmark and Sweden and Finland were quite early with thinking about this topic and starting national adaptation approaches, and also at city level. And I think what you see happening is that in this Baltic Sea region collaborative activities, you see sharing of information, sharing of practices from these countries towards Baltic countries, but also the other way around. I think that we should not forget about it as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much, sir, for taking the time and joining us via video link. We appreciate that very much. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jack.
Okay, good. That went very well. The link was very good and the sound was great. So good. Thank you. We continue with our discussion on adaptation measures, and I have sketched out already in the conversation. We have here Ilse Pruse representing the hosts, I must say, the Environment Ministry here in Latvia. She's director of the Climate Change Department. We have Getlin Denks from Estonia, also the Ministry of Environment, also the head of Climate and Radiation Department. That's called a bit differently, but more or less the same thing. And we have Jurga Valainite, who is representing the Lithuanian Ministry of Environment, and she's also the Chief Desk Officer for Climate Change Policy Division. We'll hear from Ilse Pruse at the beginning, please.
Good morning, everybody. In the light of the time, I will try to have my presentation as brief as possible, and all the slides that I'm showing now will be available online, and if you will have any further questions, you can ask them later. Yes, firstly, building on the research done by Latvian Geology and Metallurgy Center, here you can see the summary of some of variables describing climate changes in Latvia. And this is a very good illustration of what is the actual climatological value usually that we had earlier, and what changes do we expect as a result of climate change. And here you can also see those two climate change scenarios that were mentioned earlier. According to one more moderate scenario, those changes are not so significant, whereas according to rather extreme scenarios, those expected changes are very, very severe. However, I have to note here that, of course, we cannot guarantee that either of these scenarios will be realized. It might also happen differently, but at least this gives us some perspective, some guidance on what we have to work. Just as an example, a different way how to illustrate those data. For example, precipitation, which is very, very topical for us lately here in Latvia especially. We can see also in historical data that there is a very evident increase in annual precipitation, especially in winter season. And we can also see that there are considerable differences in different parts of Latvia. And therefore, I would really encourage you, if you are interested in particular data about your particular locations, please have a look at the tool developed by Center, because these data are really specific to different regions. And it was already coming out from the conversation with Andrea. When we speak about adaptation, it's very difficult to decide or find a common measure, common activity for all state, for all places in Latvia. And you have to really tailor adaptation measures to local circumstances, because those weather conditions are very, very different from place to place. And also, as an illustration to extreme events, which is one of the key characteristics of climate change. We are having more and more extreme events. And here you can see illustration of a recent heavy rainfalls that we had in Latvia, in Latgale, when during 24 hours a lot of rain was there, and that caused problems not only for infrastructure but also for farmers and for really many people. A lot of damages have been caused, and we are still calculating and trying to cope with that. These kind of situations will unfortunately in future be more frequent, and therefore in order to prepare for those situations, experts have carried out climate change vulnerability assessment and identified main risks for Latvia that are relevant. All in all, experts have currently identified around 60 different risks. Of course, some are entailing larger substance or might be more significant. Some are not that important possibly, but they all are to be considered when we think about Latvia's climate change adaptation. And they all should be, I think, looked at when also regions and particular districts are thinking what their future should look like. Amongst the top risks here, definitely here is the problems caused by increased precipitation. You can see them there, and if you are interested in more information, you can go online and also see the research themselves. As a result of those risk assessments, experts have also identified main measures for adapting to climate change in Latvia. More than 80 different measures have been identified, and they relate all aspects of our daily life in Latvia. Especially significant, I think they are for infrastructure, for agriculture, for also biological diversity. And I have to note here as well that not all risks created by climate change are negative. In case of Latvia, we can also speak about some opportunities. And here also some of the measures are actually talking about the need to use those opportunities. Moving forward toward the policy. Currently, adaptation aspects are included in Latvia's environmental policy guidelines that are in force till 2020. And actually, most of the tasks that have been included in these policy guidelines we have already fulfilled. When we created these policy guidelines in Latvia, there was almost no adaptation policy as such. Of course, there was a notion that there is a need to adapt, and generally, I think, as a normal country, we have adapted to the climate that we have currently in Latvia. But climate change adaptation is adaptation to the future climate, to the climate that we will have tomorrow, the next year or in the next decade. It's about the future adaptation. And with that regard, actually in Latvia, over the last couple of years, we have done a very significant job in assessing climate change scenarios, in assessing risks and identifying activities. And now we are about to work with the adaptation strategy. The draft of the strategy has in fact been already prepared. It's for public consultations since the mid of summer. We are receiving a lot of comments, and currently we are improving the draft of the strategy based on those comments, and very soon we are planning to release the improved version of the draft strategy and to go through the formal procedure in order to adapt it. What is the goal of this strategy? Of course, the main goal is to reduce vulnerability of Latvia's people, economy, infrastructure, buildings and nature from climate change impacts. And I also would like to emphasize that we would like to also enhance utilization of climate change related opportunities, because if we have them, then I think we have to use them. And 5 main directions of the strategy goes towards human life and health, economy, infrastructure and buildings, values of nature and history, as well as knowledge and information. And I will not go any deeper than this regarding the strategy. Currently, it's almost 200-page document with many activities identified under these 5 pillars. If you have any further questions, we'll be happy to answer. And in any case, if you have any ideas regarding what should be or what should not be included in the strategy, just feel free to send us them in through the public consultation process. And that would be briefly all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, let's keep the questions for until all the presentations are done. So, Getlin, I ask you to give us the Estonian view on this, please.
Hello from my side. My name is Getlin. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers to host such a high-quality event. So it was very interesting day yesterday. I hope the audience participated yesterday. Who wasn't there, I welcome you today. So I hope you have an interesting day today also. I would like to give you a short overview what's the state of play in Estonia regarding to the climate adaptation, and what we have done, what we will do in the future. As those pictures show, we are in the position to put in place what's the future regarding to the climate in Estonia. Will it be poor skiing weather, like we have the saying in Estonia, that if there is good winter and bad summer, or vice versa, that this is like 9 months bad skiing weather if we don't have any snow, and when the summer is quite rainy, then it's still bad skiing weather. So we don't know. Probably those pictures are reflecting truth between one age and another age. Therefore, this next slide shows quite illustratively what is our position regarding to the European level. That if you see that Estonia and Latvia and Lithuania are located quite far north, and Europe is quite bigger than only this territorial area, and the southern part of Europe is much more affected from the climate change impacts than our region. And also European level studies have put in place that our region might even gain a little bit from climate changes. Under this point, I mean like maybe some new opportunities for economy, like tourism, some other recreation activities will be much longer time available during the year, etc. And compared to the overall capacity of Estonian and Latvian and Lithuanian population, also European Commission has put in place a study, and as you see, our adaptation capacity is rather low than high compared to the other Nordic countries, and therefore we need to be more aware what's happening around us, to be ready to act as needed according to the situation. As I remember yesterday, our minister, Mr. Eglic, put it quite rightly that Latvian people awareness of climate change and adaptation and all those topics and issues are quite low. It's the same in Estonia. This graph shows Eurobarometer study, which quite clearly shows that the Baltic states are in the situation where our people knowledge and awareness about climate change is quite low, and meaning that they understand that something is going on, but as far as it doesn't affect me, I don't care. The message maybe doesn't affect them as much, maybe persons or people in Greece, in Portugal, where there are so many high peaks, very warm climate scenarios already happening today, and therefore also one keynote or key point in our adaptation program or strategy is to raise the awareness of Estonian people. Those are pictures from real life, as you see. And the one picture, the lower, where I have put a black circle on the sign. In Estonian, there is a name of the street. Actually, this is street, where the bench is near, so people, when they are walking, can sit down and rest their legs. In English, this street name means swimming, bathing. So, is it the question of adaptation, or is it question of facing the fact that something is going on? That's the real life situation. It's not photoshopped. And also some pictures from floods and storms in Tallinn and other areas in Estonia. For example, the first graph, when the lady is in the white dress and skirt, white suit with the umbrella, and nearby that is the infrastructure management, that the floods were so heavy that the sewage system was not able to take the rainwater away, and it's like fountain, middle of the street, car street. And overall, when we had this big storms in Estonia, I think it was in the year 2005, when the damages when the storm was over, the damages were calculated to be, or they were around 20 million euros. And this is not a small money, that's quite a huge money. One more slide regarding to the city, because today I have heard many speakers pointed out city and climate change issues, how they are related. And this is a picture of city of Tallinn, capital of Estonia, and how the Eat Island effect is actually coming in real life in Tallinn. And actually this is not in Tallinn, probably in other cities across Baltic states also, that if you don't have enough solutions or other possibilities to manage the heat island risk, it is quite dangerous. For example, when it was the year 2010, it was quite warm summer in Estonia. I think it was the same in other Baltic states. The average mortality rate was higher from normal rate, almost 11%. It means that more people died because of the heat waves or the warmer temperatures in our country. Currently, or previously, I talked about the floodings, and more or less the focus was with the flood or coastal area and what floods can do. But also the innerland of Estonia is affected by the climate change and extreme weather conditions like very strong winds, very heavy rains, or for example, when the river freezes and there is strong wind, and the ice banks can be put it together as a big mountain, and those pictures are all taken from the real life. Regarding or under the preparation for the climate change adaptation strategy, we also made Estonian climate scenarios for year 2100. This graphs, this slide and the next slide will show our projections when the business as usual goes on, meaning that the mostly world economy is mostly based on fossil fuels. For example, in Estonia, the average temperature will be higher, almost 4.3 degrees of Celsius, much more higher wind will blow, much more rain will fall down, the ice on the sea in the winter will much smaller, etc., and maybe even the total Estonia will not be covered or have the winter snow. It will be only like eastern part of Estonia, as the one picture shows in here. What we have done, this was just the state of play, what is happening. In this spring, 2017, Estonian government adopted or put in force Estonian low carbon development strategy until 2050. My colleague Meelis Münt yesterday shortly talked about that, but the main aim of the strategy is to reduce Estonian greenhouse gases compared to 1990, minus 80%. And this is the same graph as was presented yesterday also, who was not here yesterday. This is just picture overview, what's our aim is. And when we are going to talk about adaptation, then also national adaptation strategy was adopted in this spring. And for the adaptation strategy, we put it place or convented through 4 quite serious and heavy studies, and the names of the studies are here. They cover different sectors. For example, study CATI, the first one, was dealing with human health, rescue capacity, land use and planning. BioClim was natural environment and bioeconomy, etc., etc. Before the NAS or National Adaptation Strategy was placed, in Estonia there were some activities going on, but they were not summarized or put together under one single umbrella, and now the NAS is doing that. And the main key pillars of the NAS are those 8 sectors, which is mentioned here, as my colleague Ilse just previously mentioned. For Latvia, the topics or the sectors or the pillars are basically the same. We are covering bioeconomy, energy and energy supply system, building and infrastructure, society awareness and cooperation. Under the cooperation and society and awareness, there is, on my opinion, very important point or role plays raising the awareness of people. If you don't know what we are facing now, today, we don't know what to do in the future. And therefore, we need to raise the awareness of the people. For example, tropical diseases are not tropical diseases anymore. As also previous speaker from European Environment Agency, was it, pointed that out, that diseases are coming more up north. They are not just something what we can not take seriously anymore. What we do next? What we want to achieve under the NASH, we have put place also national adaptation plan. And the first adaptation plan is for years 2017 and till 2020. The total national adaptation strategy covers period till 2030. But national adaptation plans are like divided in different shorter time periods. And the first period is already started. We have put in place quite how to say, detailed level measure packages and different activities, what we are going to do and what we plan to do. For example, this year we started some research activities already, and we are preparing for the next year to be more seriously involved regarding to those activities. The total amount of money for the first national adaptation plan period is around 6.7 million euros, and the funding will come some part from national state budget, some part from outside finances, for example, European Economic Area financing possibilities, etc. But the total funding or total amount of money what we see, what we need to invest to the national adaptation strategy is around 44 million euros. And this is quite a lot of money. Regarding how the money and activities are divided in Estonia and between the ministries, Ministry of the Environment is responsible for putting in place the NASH and NAP, National Adaptation Plan and National Adaptation Strategy then. But different activities regarding for activity for human health, for economics, for agriculture, fishery, they are responsible under those ministries under which the sector falls. But the Ministry of Environment of Estonia is the overall responsible body to implement the national adaptation strategy in Estonia. We have put in place the flooding map, and this slide shows illustratively where we see the risk of flooding. And as you see, most of them are near to the coastlines. For Estonia, very important tourism area, like Tallinn, Narva, Jõesuu in eastern part of Estonia, Pärnu, Saaremaa. Maybe some of Latvians have visited it, I don't know. But, and also we have made the map, the flooding map, what will happen if the sea level rises. And we do this to prevent that, what's shown in the next slide. This is actually a prison in city Tartu. And adaptation to the climate change is not only to do something to have it done, it's managing risk today to save money and life tomorrow. And this is a really short overview what we are planning to do in year 2018. I shortly talked about that. And this is information regarding the climate change, what you can find in Estonian website. And that's it from my side. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Getlin. Let's hear from the Lithuanian part as well. Jurga Valainita, please.
Good day, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here, and I will present you Lithuanian climate change policy and priorities with emphasis on climate change risk and adaptation. And here is the short outline. I will talk about Lithuania's key climate policies, adaptation policy goals and objectives, specifically on short-term goals, and not to be repetitive, as I think the tendencies are quite similar in all the Baltic states. Like we also have flooded streets in the cities after heavy rains, as precipitation levels got much higher than previous years. And we have youth using canoes for entertainment. But I will stick on specific examples that I chose. Lithuania's key climate change policy is based on the law on financial instruments for climate change management, and the strategy for the national climate change management policy until 2050, which was elaborated and approved in November 2012. And it sets legally binding short-term, indicative mid-term and long-term adaptation and mitigation policies, targets and objectives. And we also have interinstitutional action plan on the implementation of a strategy, which was approved by the government, and it contains provisions related to transition to a competitive low-carbon, climate-resilient economy, and foresees measures for climate change adaptation and mitigation in Lithuania. The plan contains investment and institutional capacity, provides economic, commercial, environmental, and other measures to achieve targets and objectives set in the national strategy. This is the structure of our strategy, and it contains of two main parts. It's mitigation and adaptation goals and objectives. As you can see, they both have short-term, mid-term goals until 2030 and 2040, and long-term goals. And mitigation part also has sectors covered by the EU ETS and non-ETS sectors. And these are the sectors contained in the strategy. We have sectors related to mitigation, which are transport, energy, forestry, industry, agriculture, and others. Sectors important to formation of a policy as education, science, international cooperation, and also the adaptation to climate change sectors, which are the Baltic Sea region, water resources, landscape, ecosystem, and others. And the strategic goal of our adaptation policy is to reduce vulnerability of the natural ecosystems and natural economy sectors, as well as to ensure resilience and favorable conditions for social life and economic activities in all economic sectors. The strategic goal for adaptation is implemented following these main directions: its integrated approach, synergy of mitigation and adaptation measure, contribution of country-specific scientific research to adaptation, and strong knowledge bases. And here I'd like to add that the latest interinstitutional action plan of the year 2016 and relevant sectorial development plans cover measures for adaptation to climate change with estimated investment needs for implementation reaching up to 972 million euros in the period 2013-2020. Here I will present some sector-specific short-term goals. In agriculture and soil sector, the goal is to increase resistance of the agricultural sector to climate change. Forestry, ecosystems, biodiversity and landscape goals focus on reducing negative impact on climate change on natural ecosystems and preserving and improving sustainability of forest ecosystems and strengthening their environmental and social role. The sector-specific goals on water resources are to reduce the negative effects of rising water levels and extreme weather events on the quality of the surface water and groundwater, and to develop an effective flood risk assessment and management system, which we have already adopted. And in the energy and transport and industry sectors, it is to enhance adaptation of the most climate change sensitive areas and to improve the resilience of infrastructure. Climate change adaptation goals and objectives for the Baltic Sea region, which is defined as the most vulnerable region in Lithuania, are integrated into sectorial targets and objectives of forest ecosystem, biodiversity, landscape, and water resources. And as awareness is a very strong part of our adaptation to climate change policy, and as it is one of the assessment criteria directly related to implementation of climate change adaptation goals and objectives for informing the public, and that is fully functioning national climate change information coordination mechanism. Ministry of Environment is currently developing a project to create the web portal for climate change mitigation and adaptation, which will be aired by 2019 at the latest. In the public health sector, short-term goal is to reduce negative impact of climate change on human health, and the objectives set to attain this goal is ensuring protection of the population health by reducing risks posed by climate change, as well as developing an effective system for the prevention of climate change-related diseases. And here you can see two implemented measures, which was the study identifying the climate change threats to human health, including the recommendations published in 2014, and the National Public Health and Heat Prevention Action Plan for 2016-2020, adopted in 2015. Here are the planned measures for public health sector, which are to prepare the climate change health indicators, to improve cooperation internationally, and to improve awareness about risk of climate change and adaptation measures. And here is more detailed information about the National Public Health and Heat Prevention Action Plan, which has the main goal to protect population health with particular emphasis on the most vulnerable groups from negative heat impacts by increasing public awareness of the dangers of heat and prevention, providing timely advices and announcement of upcoming heat waves, and raising awareness among the public health specialists, general medical practitioners and school workers, as well as coordinating and mobilizing all available resources in a timely manner to prevent the health consequences of the heat waves. And following the adopted Health and Heat Prevention Action Plan, the Heat Impacts Prevention Intersectorial Working Group was established in 2016 with a purpose to duly prepare for a possible heat and its negative impacts which pose a health threat. According to the order of the Ministers of Health and Environment, there is an obligation to inform the public on climate change impacts and disaster risks to human health. And according to these rules provided, the Center for Health Education and Diseases Prevention collects data from Hydrometeorological Service, Health Emergency Situation Center, Center for Communicable Diseases, the University, and Academy of Allergology Commission, and it prepares and publishes reports twice a year. And we also have some good practice examples when weather forecasts include extreme events, possible threats, and other information related to adaptation to climate change. Here I would like to present the public warning system, which was adopted by the Fire and Rescue Department under the Ministry of Interior, which is responsible for warning and informing the public on imminent or actual emergency, including natural disturbances and disaster risks at state level, potential consequences, means of their implementation, and methods of protection against emergency. And the residents are warned using sirens of local level management that are installed on the state institutions, economic entities, public buildings, residential buildings or towers. First, they are warned and informed not only using sirens but also using modern cell broadcast technology by sending messages directly to the mobile phones of residents in the territory of Lithuania. And cell broadcast technology was developed in 2012 after this particular project funded by European Union. And cell broadcast technology allows delivering information messages within a specified territory of the public mobile phone communication network coverage area. Unlike with sending short messages, cell broadcast messaging does not require search and identification of a subscriber. That is to say, messages are simultaneously delivered to all citizens within a specified area who have a cell broadcasting messaging function activated on their mobile phones, irrespective of the number of the residents in that territory, and avoiding congestion on public mobile communication networks. The messages can be delivered not only to the Lithuanian residents, but also foreign citizens in the territory of Lithuania. The purpose of public warning system is effectively alerting and informing inhabitants in real time about dangerous or extreme situations using cell broadcast technology in mobile networks. Cell broadcast technology being used for messaging is ideal for transmitting of emergency messages, ensuring very high inhabitants reach level because of full coverage of GSM network in the country and very high level mobile phone usage. And I'd like to finalize my presentation with a Rusnė case study demonstrating that even a small part of a society may have political powers for implementation. Rusnė is a small and isolated town in the river Nemunas Delta in Šilutė district, surrounded by waters and having the only road to, so to say, island. When Nemunas water spills widely, Rusnė town gets cut off from the rest of the world. And therefore, for those who wish to reach schools or workplaces and bigger cities, they have to use a troll drawn by a tractor. And spring floods are a trivial round for local residents. The fact that this location is 1.5 meters above Coronian Lagoon illustrates why it annually suffers from the floodings. And during the time of spring, flood waters of the Nemunas raises nearly 3 meters above sea level. And this problem was repetitive and residents were complaining every year, but it didn't have any effect on the government. While finally this year heavy rains and strong floodings in spring were followed by protests near Lithuanian parliament, stimulated by the residents of yearly isolated Rusnė. And so the outcome of this visible action was a given promise of the authorities to build an overpass by the end of 2018, which, with a cost of nearly 10 million euros. And the procedures have already started. So I would like to finish this presentation with an optimistic note inspired by this example, that each and every one of us has the power and the responsibility in our own hands, and we can make the change. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Dear friends, I have a bunch of questions coming in from the audience, but we're out of time, and I don't want you to deprive entirely of the coffee break, because I mean coffee is important for our survival in conferences. So, so what I will do is, I mean, all of those questions, and thank you very much for all of them. They are being addressed to the participants, and they will not disappear. They will be tackled in a written manner and will be sent out. And a bunch of them are really important ones, and sort of trying to engage in discussion. But at the same time, they're quite specific at the same time as well. So I think it's better for us to just gather them as a bunch and then have them answered in a written form and disseminated so that you can read the answers if you really need them to. So that concludes the discussion part of it, or I'm sorry, we're really out of time. So, but thank you very much for all of these. I mean, a lot of aspects in that experience of developing policies to adapt to the challenge of climate change. Thank you very much.